Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Control Port Podcast, episode 367. My name is Benjamin Yoder. I'm here today to talk to you about video games for the month of April. Wow, this aprilvideogames.com. I'm here. I got a chunky episode this month. Fighting games back on the brain for me, so we're gonna talk a little bit about that. A handful of news stories, some about like how games are made today, some about like how your age impacts how you kind of look at Tomodachi Life and things like that. And I also played some Medal games recently. Konami Medal Games. All of that too. And then Hot Pot Gaming is at its anniversary. Gonna go over some of that stuff. Gunvolt 3. I played through Gunvolt 3. And then obviously Switch 2, but I feel like everybody's talked about Switch 2 at this point. So I'm going to really focus in on the points that I think matter to me. And then everything from there, I'm just not going to think too much about. You know, I'm sure you've been blasted in the ears about what a Switch 2 is, all that kind of stuff. So I'll keep that towards the end of the show, I think, to make sure that only the true Ben fans hear my Switch 2 opinions, because otherwise, I don't know. I just think it's like, I don't know what I can say that's like all that interesting about Switch 2 that hasn't already been blasted on the internet. So but to start with something that I think was more of a challenging thing for me to think about recently was I recently got back to fighting games. Exactly why, I'm not 100% sure. Now that I think about it, I think it's because EVO is coming up, and a friend of mine reached out to me about EVO. And one thing I wanted to do last year that I didn't do was sign up for a fighting game tournament. You know, I was having that little kind of like thing where I was going through Granblue Fantasy, trying to ask the question of like, what makes a fighting game interesting? How do we talk about fighting games? And what makes fighting games so hard to talk about to, I think, normal people like me, right? Because I often feel completely isolated by fighting games. And I think I learned a lot in that process. And I think if I went and did a tournament at the time, I probably would have been fine with it. I don't know what I would have learned back then or anything, but you know, I'm coming in late on this, a year late. So I had to kind of get back into, I registered with the fighting game tournament, not EVO, but Level Up Expo here. And I'm going to be playing Granblue Fantasy Versus. But I sat down and started playing Granblue Fantasy Versus. And I had a really hard time finding the right mindset, because beforehand I had a very strong mindset of like, I'm going to come into this game, see what it's like coming in without knowing anything, and also see like how hard it is to pick up without like going and like reading a wiki, right? Like, I just think that's like a very unnatural way to get into fighting games. Perfectly fine way to do it. I'm just saying that that's not like what I'm interested in, right? That's not how I want to get into something. It's like starting by reading the wiki. Anyways, but I sat down and I started playing Granblue Fantasy Versus. And I think in that moment, I don't remember what I said last time when I talked about Granblue Fantasy Versus, the fighting game that I play. I think generally I don't like Granblue Fantasy Versus that much. There are some things about it that I do enjoy. And there are also things about it in regards to accessibility that's very helpful for me. But I generally don't like the game. I generally don't like the characters. I generally don't like most things about it. I think it is just kind of the circumstance of the game it is. And then also at the time, I think it had a little bit of an extra hook with the cooldown system, where like doing like a Hadouken basically isn't something you can just spam, right? It's something that comes with cooldowns. So you have to be more resourceful in how you spend those special abilities and things like that, right? So that's kind of what I was at with that. And I think generally what I learned most from back then was that when you look at characters and how characters interact with each other in fighting games, it's this really in-depth thing of like, there's a lot of kind of branching paths, and how those paths branch in terms of your decision making depend very heavily on the character you are and who the character is on the other side. And so adding a character to a fighting game seems like it's not just about adding a character that you can play, but it's also adding a character you can play against. And so what your character, like I play a character called Zoe, when they add a character, how does Zoe fight this character, right? That was kind of my takeaway. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. That is just like my general takeaway. And so I came back, I think, generally at that mindset. But I think the key thing I was ignoring before was fighting games are more than just, basically checks to be like, do you know how to fight a person, right? Another part of fighting games, and this is the part that in a lot of ways was very actively pushing against, and I think there's a lot of reasons why, is the combo game. When you sit down and you need to actually do damage to somebody, right? Because if you just do what I like to do, which is just hit people and then like I got what I want out of it, usually you're not going to be doing a lot of damage. Part of fighting games is making sure somebody can't escape a chain of hits, right? That's why they're called combos. And one thing that I find the most boring parts of fighting games is definitely being in the corner, being unable to do anything, and you're just kind of watching your character get juggled. I don't know how other people feel about that. I think some people, it's a frustrating feeling. I kind of associate it just with boredom. There's nothing I can do. I'm just watching. And I think especially if you don't appreciate the spectacle of the game, or the talent that goes into making sure those combos and things like that, it's very difficult to appreciate it from the other side, because just like, okay, I'm just stuck here for a while. I'm going to get out. I'm going to get like 1 or 2 chances to try to get out, and then I'm going to get stuck in this very long combo again. The walls in fighting games suck. They're intended to suck, but I think they're also just sap any fun I have out of a match. I kind of don't care once I'm in a wall. And so a lot of times I just disengage, honestly. I'm just kind of like, I want the match to end so I can just go back to the center of the stage for a bit. Anyways, but I was thinking about that because I was like, I came away playing initially. I was just like, man, I'm not having a good time, and I kind of went into the same, I think, mindset I kind of run into. I was like, why do people like these games? Why do people like the characters in these games? And again, I think I was looking at like Grand Blue Fantasy, and like, I don't like any of the characters in the game. Why am I playing Grand Blue Fantasy if I don't like any of the characters in the game? And why I like certain characters or not is another thing. I think I am somebody who just appreciates the initial hit, right? Damn Stompland on the PlayStation. We talked about that before. It's a game where you go and step on each other's character shadows. You only need to step on them 3 times, right? That to me is like the essence of what I find enjoyable in a fighting game, boiled down to the simplest thing, right? Go, walk over somebody, press X, bam! You do the damage. Do that 2 more times, you win, right? There's more complexity there, but it is generally the core function of that game is that. And that's why Damn Stompland to me is really good. And I think, to some extent, Smash Brothers can fall into that, especially early Smash Brothers, where combos are kind of... I think the thing that I feel about combos in fighting games, and I feel like this is probably true of early Smash Brothers, but maybe less so later ones, is... combos feel incredibly unnatural in these games, where they feel like putting together a combination of things that shouldn't be combined, and then that's how you end up with a combo. So it's like everything just feels like really unnatural. But anyways, that's aside. I don't really want to talk about that too much, because I think that's something I haven't really figured out in my brain, and I think doesn't really matter. I think it just kind of is trying to figure out like why I don't like combos. But basically what I did this time now is I had to decide, what am I trying to do here? Am I trying to find a fighting game that I like, or am I trying to participate in a fighting game tournament? Both very valid things to look at. What I'm doing right now is try to participate in a fighting game tournament. I'm not trying to find a fighting game that I like right now. So I basically went and said, okay, now I'm going to do the thing that I said I was going to do before, because I'm past the point where like I'm not trying to get onboarded through a wiki. Now I'm just like, okay, if I go to a wiki, I can just go like look at stuff that's happening. And so it's cumbersome. It's confusing. Again, it's like one of those things where like once you know the language, it's fine. But like when the first time you're looking at it, you're like, there's a giant strings of like letters and numbers, and they all mean different inputs. And you're just like, I don't know what any of this means. Like, I know what it means when I sit down and think about it. It's just like, I have to really think about it. And then it doesn't help that like some of the things like with the games that have different like input styles, it's like, oh, there's this move that's 2, 3, 4 L. But when I put it in, like the actual input I'm putting in is actually just like 2X or something like that. I don't know what it is. But it's always listed as 2, 3, 4 L. It's like, what was 2, 3, 4 L? Is that the / one? Is that the / one? It's like, I don't know. Anyways. So I started doing that. And I think, it was helpful in just having somebody else's combos. When I go into ranked mode, I generally don't want to sit there and just like join training just to be in training. But when you play ranked mode online, while you're waiting for a match, you get a little bit of training time. So you usually get a chance to like try whatever you're trying to do, like 2 to 3 inputs, and then you can go try to do it in a match against somebody. And, whether you can actually do it in a match against somebody really depends on if you can even get them in the position that's needed for you to start, what you're trying to do. So I learned maybe like 2 or 3 things, not a ton, but I signed up for a different tournament, a local one that's just like very small scale. I think it was like 6 to 7 people, and I went there, and that was an interesting experience. It is a good reminder to me of just like how hard it is to talk to people who like fighting games until there's a reason for me to talk, right? I just kind of showed up, and like generally I have nothing to say to anybody. It's not like I can just come into the conversation and be like, hey guys, I play Zoe. I mean, I could do that, but like I don't know what I'm going to say beyond, hey guys, I play Zoe. Zoe, she got a dragon. I don't know. Like, I just don't know where that conversation goes, right? But eventually, I basically sat around long enough. And once people realize like what game you're playing, and I think especially I am horrendously obvious as being socially awkward, and then being new, people, want to come in and they want to like, talk to you about stuff and get you excited. It's a small community of people. I think they're just happy to have somebody, there coming and participating in things like that. So, I had 2 matches. I lost both of them pretty horribly. The first guy, A, not only beat the crap out of me, but B, did it in complete silence. I was just like, oh man. And, I also messed up a little bit where like, I didn't assign my controls before the match. It was like something I didn't really ever think about, but makes sense, where you have to like, other players playing the game are going to change their controls to match whatever controller they're using or whatever preference they're using. So when you sit down and play, if you don't reset the controls, they're going to be all messed up. So I immediately go into the fight and like, oh, the controls are completely messed up. And I have to be like, hey, sorry, I can't control my character. Can we restart, or like not restart, but I had to go into like the controls menu, like after one of the rounds was over, but that would not have changed the outcome whatsoever. But yeah, generally it's just kind of nice, and like, definitely, like with anything, people have different personalities. And so the second guy I fought with seemed a lot more casual about it and seemed a lot more interested in kind of, telling me more about what was going on and why it was going on, and presenting it in a very like, friendly way kind of thing. Right. More invested in like making sure you are understanding why, what you need to do to improve, right? And so it was very funny because he was like, the character I played, I mentioned earlier, or Zoe, he's like, Zoe's just so honest. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he basically is just like, Zoe's just a character that has no gimmicks, basically. And that's probably part of why I like Zoe. There's a lot of other reasons I don't want to get into about like why I like other fighting games. I think that's not the question I'm trying to answer right now. I think that's a question to answer after the tournament. It's just like, how do I find a fighting game that I enjoy? And how do I enjoy it? But I think as long as I don't accept like the combo game as like a part of fighting games, or at least being accepted that is something that needs to be a part of what I'm doing, it's going to be really challenging to find fighting games outside of things like a Kabuki Warriors, where there's really no combos, right? Or like Damn Stompland, with not really any combos there, right? That's not to say there's not fighting games I've played that don't have combos that I enjoy. Dead or Alive, I think, is a really good example of a game that I think just kind of eases you in without having to think about too much. Obviously, that's the skill level actually playing it too. But anyways, it was a good time. I got last place, but I got a pity Twix, so that was fun. And I came home and I make my own froyo sometimes. So I made some froyo. I mixed the Twix in there, and that was my reward for going out there and doing that. So it's one of those things that, I'm just so all over the place with stuff that I feel a little bad, because people will be like, oh yeah, well, you'll learn, you'll get better, and, we'll be happy to see you next time. And I'm just like, I don't know if I'm coming back here or not. Like my interest range, at some point, I'm going to go run off and do something else. And so like my ability to stay engaged with something like this, especially something like a fighting game that requires an immense amount of dedication, is limited, or I would say a challenging buy. Obviously, there are some exceptions to that. Final Fantasy XI was a deep hole I went into for a very long time, And, I still kind of go in and out of it. But it is something that I generally have, have kind of eased off on at this point. So now I'm trying to, figure out, what is my relationship with Final Fantasy 11 now? And I would like to keep Final Fantasy 11 a part of my life without it absorbing my life, which Final Fantasy 11 is a very challenging game to do that with. So, yeah, that's kind of, well, I should say Horizon 11, the rollback servers where it's like everything takes 4 hours to do. So that is the thing. So how do you manage this thing in your life where it's still a part of your life but doesn't absorb your life, kind of thing, right? And Final Fantasy 11 is interesting in how it kind of gets its hooks into me, at least. So anyways, that was my fighting game stuff. The actual tournament's at Level Up Expo. I don't know if I'll end up on stream or not. I fully intend to lose immediately, but I'll try my best. I'll try my best. I am one of the guys at the tournament. He was talking to me about like why I picked Zoe, and I'm like, honestly, probably for these two moves. He's like, cool. Let me show you a combo with your two favorite moves. And I was like, okay. And so I've been trying to learn that combo, but I don't really remember it entirely. So I need to look to see if there's like actual resources or if that's just like a custom combo he made to work for me. So it was interesting. So I want to get into news a little bit here. So let me switch over to my screen here. Bam. Look at that. Leon S. Kennedy. This is an interesting article that made me think a lot. So if you don't know, one of the challenges I have these days is trying to understand like what people feel is dissatisfying about modern games. This article to me kind of read as like an interesting kind of way that might, or interesting point of view of looking at how games get made that might contribute to this. But basically, this is a interview that was with I think an ex-Capcom producer, Hiroyuki Kobayashi. Is that what it is? Yeah, Kobayashi. I typoed his name on my notes. But he's worked on stuff like DMC, Sengoku Basara, and things like that. So, Automaton Media basically had an interview with him, and kind of the big things he said in this interview was basically how games get made these days. I'm not sure where it is in this article, but on the notes I have here, it says, in the past, we used to start work on a game that with just a vague idea of this seems interesting. If we experienced developers working on it, if we had experienced developers working on it, we'd be able to make it succeed somehow. I'm butchering this quote, but the general gist, hopefully. But now it's no longer possible to sell a game only because it's fun. You have to do proper marketing in advance and analyze the target audience you're trying to appeal to. We are now in an age where you will not be accepted if you do not clearly define your target. Now, to be clear, part of this article was him talking about how he's very specifically targeting a Western audience with this next game with, I forget, NetEase? Yeah, NetEase is who he's working with. And also we're talking about a very specific space here, right? It sounds like, I don't know for sure, but it sounds like he's probably in the more AAA space with this kind of thing, right? And I think to me, when people talk about the lack of like things like what it means to be lack of creativity or the lack of like B games and stuff like these days, sometimes I think it's hard to really understand what exactly they're saying feels lacking. And, this kind of gets, I think, mixed in my head with the mindset that like everything feels like it should be, everything feels solved, right? Or somebody's like, you can't have a platformer that feels like it's doing something, exploring something new very often. It feels like it's all we had made the best way a platformer controls, and we can't change that, right? And I think in my mind, maybe what that really means is that like within the bound of the target market for this game, we cannot deviate beyond a certain point. And so because there's a baseline understanding of how games should play, there's a lot more resistance to trying to do something different. And part of the thing that people talk about with like, oh, I wish there was more B games, and then when you say like, oh, if you look at the indie game scene, a lot of games have kind of come and filled in that space. I think part of what they're talking about is there's like a level of protection that comes from working at a company that's a larger company that has the financial resources to burn if something goes wrong, right? And so when you have somebody making a game on an indie scale, the person making the game probably is a lot more invested in exactly what's happening market-wise. I don't know for sure. This is just me thinking about why people say these things about like why games are unsatisfying today. And I think maybe what happens with indie games is that there is a more direct connection between the person making the game and the target audience they're trying to hit. And so it creates these situations where, the person creating a game may feel more constrained about what they can do with the game, right? I don't know for sure. I just was thinking about this in the context of, of why people feel so unsatisfied with modern games. And I feel like maybe heavily defining a target audience and then also being responsible for, hey, making sure A, your family can eat, B, the rest of your team's family can eat, like that kind of stuff comes into role there, right? It's not just about whether or not you're making a successful game or not, and then people being like, oh, because they're greedy. Look, we all have certain needs we need financially in life to get things done, right? And developers not exactly the way to get the most money. Go work in business software if you want to make the most money. Don't work on video games. But I think it was just like an interesting point of view of just like we are in a situation now where the target audience needs to be predefined because of the financial stakes at a AAA developer, and then on an indie level, the financial stakes of being a small developer without the backing of a company where you can afford to fail, right? So now that being said, that's not necessarily across the board. One thing that came up around the same time was the Katamari Damacy developer, Keita Takahashi. Yeah, Keita Takahashi. He recently announced a game about it's like a kid who's T-posing or something. I don't know. So he has like a bunch of weird stuff in his house on and that like to get his shoes on, he has like a device to help get his shoes on. It's a cute looking game. It's like a giraffe. She dances in the trailer or whatever. But one thing I think you talked about at the very end of this article, also on Automata Media, was the fact that he makes games that he likes more first and foremost, and then if people want to play them, they can play them, right? And I think, let me see if there's the exact quote is like, I guess I probably should make games while thinking about a target audience, but I'll work on that in my next life. Now, obviously, I think one thing that Takahashi has is that, Katamari Damacy was able to reach an audience, a pretty large one at the time. And so I think anytime you have an audience that you have created once, you obviously have some level of buffer to kind of do what you want, right? When I think about people who leave media outlets and then go create their own thing, if they were to create their own Patreon, not working at a media outlet where they got their own following first, the ability to bring people over is a lot more challenging, right? So anyways, just stuff I was thinking about in that regard. So AI, we all love AI, right? I think I've been following kind of like AI translation stuff for a while. Obviously, we use a lot of machine translation. Something we'll see on this article, and then also other articles we're going to look at today is that I rely on machine translation for a lot of things. I think the big thing we always try to say is that we can't really guarantee that AI translation is accurate. And there's a lot of things that are going to be lost. And so we always have to be careful of that. So anyways, this is an article though. Basically, it was at the Game Developers Conference talking about basically using AI for game localization. I believe this is a talk given by DMM Games, because apparently they have a DMM Games translate service, which I didn't look into it. I don't know what DMM Games has localized, if ever. I know DMM Games from this is the launcher where I go play Venus Vacation for a while. And then also they have a horny launcher and a non-horny launcher, depending on the games you want to get into. But yeah, what was interesting about this though, is a few different things. One, they were trying to separate, different types of machine translation. One they kind of said was rules-based translation. Statistical machine translation, I don't know what these terms mean, and neural machine translation. The point being is that one of these are from 1990s, one of these from 2000s, and then one's from 2016. And they say the modern translation tools are generally built on these kind of 2016 rules. But the big thing is that how this impacts translation workflow, basically. Because I think we have always one thing you'll hear a lot is you'll get you'll have someone who something gets run through machine translation and the editor comes in on the back end to basically clean it up, right? Whether that's a good way to translate games or another thing, a lot of this is about cost savings. all that kind of stuff. And when it comes to things like Dojin games, that's going to make a lot of sense where you can't ever translate something. When it comes to like the Front Mission game that's coming out, it feels like Square Enix probably could pay a localizer or something like that. I don't remember. That was like a rumor. I don't know if they actually used AI for translation for that or machine translation. I remember some text was really messed up in that game though. So let me not. I'm just saying, as I spread this information without knowing anything about it, I may be wrong about it with Front Mission, but that kind of thing, where basically, AI translation is used in a more professional product, right? Where, it's questionable what the quality is and if that is appropriate for a product put out by a large company like a Square Enix kind of thing, right? But really what this whole article was basically talking about was like the importance of like upfront work with AI translation, which basically is kind of like preemptively establishing a worldview kind of thing, right? And a part of this was like basically when you are making a translation, you have to, in some ways, build the world for this tool that they have first, where you have to kind of restrict things. Like you have a fantasy world, but if you don't tell the fantasy world an assault rifle can't exist, the AI is going to think an assault rifle can exist in a fantasy world, right? You have to like kind of restrict what exactly is happening. And so what they're talking about this is that, basically you are, as the original creator, telling this tool what your world is and what are the constraints of your world. And then that is creating, at the end of the day, a translation that comes out, and then it requires less editing on the back end. But they kind of talk about it requires more editing on the front end kind of thing, right? A big thing of this, though, is they're talking about it from a cost-saving perspective. They estimated that the typical cost of doing this workflow is around 3 cents per word, where if you just pay a human translator directly normally, it's around 10 to 30 cents per word, I think. I don't think they gave that number specifically, but I think I looked into it later after I read this article kind of thing. So obviously the bigger question is, when we look at this thing, people are going to say, okay, well, like, what role do translators play in this? Because that's obviously going to change, or it is actively, in some ways, actively changing how localization processes work. I say as somebody who does not work in localization, just to be clear, it seems like that is something that is like getting its fingers into the actual localization process now, this kind of stuff. And I think the answer they kind of gave was a little, I don't know, dismissive, which is basically, they say they think translators are going to be more focused as localization directors, where they basically understand the game world itself and basically review the text and just kind of make sure everything's intact basically at the end. The reason why I say this is kind of feels a little disingenuous is because they talk about at some point in here, again, machine translation, the idea that like, what will this do to the like people working in this space? And they say, we think people will be able to work more independently and also only focus on the games they really want to translate, which to me seems like a very hollow thing to say. And also saying that, like, you're going to choose games that you really want to translate. To me sounds like it's like, oh, you're going to like you're going to have less work to do kind of thing. So, you can just focus on the games you want to focus on, which I don't know. It seems very much like a not real answer to like what impact this will have on localization. But anyways, that's not to say anything about the quality of these tools. This is just what they're saying. Obviously they're at GDC. They're trying to present their point about this stuff. They said they can localize 50 tiles per 6 months or something like that. Does it say how many people that is? 50 tiles translated within 6 months of the Surface launch. Supports 10 languages. Some clients release AI translations without post-editing. So it seems like they are doing actual releases now. Anyways, point being, I think it's interesting from a workflow perspective. I think it is one of those things where, like, at the end of the day, these people are invested in this position, and so they're going to like use some language to be like, oh, it's not going to be a big deal. Don't worry about it. It will make your life better as a translator. But I think it depends on how you look at translation, right? If you look at translation as a very direct one-to-one thing, something like this is going to be more appealing to you. You're talking about like, people who run machine translation to like quote unquote correct localizers and things like that. It's kind of another thing. So Tomodachi Collection, I forget what the name of the Switch one is. I don't think we talked about it because there was the smaller Switch Direct. Did we talk about that at all? I don't think we did. Yeah, I don't think we did. I don't really have a lot to say about that initial Direct that happened with the Switch, but they did announce a new Tomodachi Collection. Again, I don't need to tell you that. You know that. I forget the name of it for the US one. I see Waku Waku in there for the Japanese one, at least. But this is an article, I believe, from a website called like Otaku Research something. I think I looked it up at G Show. Where is it? Otaku Research Institute. It's Otaku Soken. So if you know Japanese, you know better than me what this site's called. It's an interesting site. I mostly got to it because Automata Media had been sourcing them for some articles, so I added these guys to my my Feedly. And what I thought was interesting about this article, again, machine translated, is that it was talking about how people online reacted to the idea of a new Tomodachi Collection. And if you don't know, when it comes to Tomodachi Collection, this is a series of games that focus on the Miis that are from the Nintendo Wii and things like that. And the kind of idea was that you're going to create a group of you're going to put your friends in this game, and they're all going to interact with each other and do weird things, right? And I think the way I saw it kind of presented a lot of times in Japan was like kind of adding your friends from school and things like that. I don't really know what the general age demographic was of the game, but this is during the DS era. So, I think it was a game that probably had a demographic that aimed a little lower. But, you basically have these Miis that just kind of interact with each other. They're put in like weird situations, things like that. It's kind of goofy in some ways. I think part of the fun of these games is being like, oh, this happened to you in my game when you're talking to your friend later. But this article, so the second one came out in 2013. That was the Tomodachi Collection. I forget what the U.S. name was. Was it called? Looks like the Japanese name was New Life. I don't remember the U.S. name. Maybe it was just called Tomodachi Collection in the U.S. I don't remember. Sorry, my brain. But that came out in 2013. And so a part of this article is talking about how since this game was announced, there were people on Japanese Twitter talking about how their relationships with people have changed, basically, where they no longer have any friends to collect. And they talked about the fact that, like, when the original game came out or the second game came out, they were, school students. And so they could easily go and like add a bunch of people from their class. And they, had a lot of people that they could call friends that they could add. And then they mentioned the fact that, like, now that they're an adult, there's like very few people they can call friends. And one thing that someone mentioned in here, they're talking about the fact that like they could add people who either they're following or being followed by on Twitter and stuff like that. But there's this concept of that they mentioned of it being terrifying to be added to someone's Tomodachi Collection as a grown adult. Like the idea that like without permission, you are adding somebody or someone is adding you to their Tomodachi Collection thing. I am curious, like, where that sentiment comes from and why, and like, what are the social anxieties that come with adding someone to your Tomodachi Collection? I think there can be some weird stuff, especially if you're like in a relationship with somebody, and like, the character like does things that wouldn't necessarily be normal. Like, say you have a crush on someone, right? You got yourself a crush, and in the game you add your crush in as well, and you have your own Mii in there. There's like something probably weird about like watching that little fantasy of these like two characters kind of interact with each other, right? Like there's probably something strange about that. And then probably something strange about it if they get together, and also if they don't get together. There's probably a weird feeling behind that. So maybe like some anxieties about these kind of like feelings as you get older that are less so than just, I have a friend named Steve. He's a goofy little kid over there. And, in the game, he's also a goofy little kid kind of thing. So, but yeah, I would say as somebody who like was mostly, I don't want to say, I guess isolated. When I originally made my Miis on the Wii, I think I didn't really have many people that were like real people on my Wii, right? I had me, I had my sister, because my sister was there, but I didn't really have people come over and things like that. So the Miis I had were either original creations I made, or they're based off characters, Final Fantasy 11 characters I had, stuff like that. So like I created a population of characters that existed and were relevant to me in a lot of ways, right? And so that made me wonder, like, what what does your Mii collection on your Wii or in Tomodachi Collection mean, like, as you as a person? Like, what does it say about you as a person, kind of thing? Because I think when I recently played Tomodachi Collection on the DS a handful of years back, I added characters from games. I like specifically decided to add characters from games I was playing, and so it was like, these characters I want to add from these games are more like immediately relevant to me and things like that right now. And one thing they kind of mentioned about, like, there was some comments in here, was like the idea of like adding an Oshi, which I think Oshi would be like kind of like idols and VTubers and things like that. Again, I did not go and like actually try to translate this, so it's just from my brain basically. But I think that says a lot about, like, I think something, if you hear me talk about like VTubers and streamers and stuff, I think it can come off as like very negative, where sometimes I feel like when you are listening to podcasts, watching VTubers, all these things, if you do it too much, or rather if you're using it as a way to replace like direct interactions you'd have in life, it's probably not a very good thing, right? If you feel like your friend is like the podcaster you listen to, hey, I know it's a tough conversation to have, but keep that in mind. Anytime you're listening to anyone on a podcast, it's like, it's a very one-way relationship, right? And so, it is one of those things where I think I can come off as pretty negative, because I would be like, hey, maybe you should go and have a conversation with somebody about this that is like somebody you actually know, right? Part of hot pot gaming, and I don't know if this has come off across or not, is the idea that like, I want you to go talk to somebody that has a question that you think is interesting, right? Like, I think the better thing I would want out of it is like, not so much for you to listen to the show, but for you to go talk to somebody who has an opinion you don't really understand and try to get something out of them, right? I think that is like what I want out of hot pot gaming from you, is to find people you can do that with, right? Whether that's something I communicate or not, it's another thing, but I think that is my core goal in terms of like, if I'm going to say, what impact do I want to make with hot pot gaming that is not selfish, that would be the number one thing, probably, right? And then so like the idea that like, oh, I need to like, I'm going to populate my Tomodachi collection with all VTubers or something because I have no friends, maybe says something about like what you need to do with your life in terms of like, where do you need to like fix those things? And that's not to say that like I'm perfectly balanced, right? I have grown up with mostly people who are friends online, even people that I am local with. I have, I think, very online relationships with. And so I think the way I understand friendships and interactions with people is probably very different than like somebody who just like has a group they get together with, every week or something like that, right? Physically versus online and stuff like that. And I think that's something that it's very easy for me to see that when I go see people who do have those, groups and things like that. So, but yeah, just kind of, I thought it was an interesting question. It's like, what does Tomodachi Collection and who you put in Tomodachi Collection kind of says about where you're at in your life, and what are your relationships, and where you could improve those relationships. but yeah, I'm kind of interested in the new Tomodachi Collection. I don't think we talked about it too much, but I think at the end of the day, I need to see more of what's going on. We're on the third Tomodachi Collection game. I think Tomodachi Collection's cool. I don't know if I need to play more Tomodachi Collection. I think that's kind of maybe where I'm just at. Again, you know me. That's nothing to say about the quality of Tomodachi Collection. It just says something about where I'm at with Tomodachi Collection. So, so yeah. But anyways, you guys want to talk about not news stuff? You guys want to talk about, speaking about, I don't know, gambling, basically gambling. Look, I recently went to round one. And I have, with my local round one, I've had a few goals, and I have not been particularly good at delivering on looking at like these things at round one. One of the things I wanted to look at was Castlevania Marble of Souls. This is unfortunately not an arcade game, really. It is a metal redemption game. If you ever seen one of those coin pusher games where you put the coins on the machine, that's basically what this is, where it pushes the coins down. But instead, in this case, it's marbles. So what happens is you go scan your card. I forget how much it is per play. It's 12 credits at my local one, and I think it was $25 for like 150 credits, maybe. I don't know for sure. So every time you put in 12 credits, you get some more marbles to shoot. And kind of the core goal is a couple different things on this. One is that you're generally just trying to push the marbles down so you can get more tickets. I don't really care about tickets, so that's not really a part of my interest level as much here. Or you can also push the marbles into these little holes that are there. You can see like there's these things that say spin there if you're looking at the video version of this podcast. And that basically plays the slot machine in the background. Richter whips the slot, and then he basically gives you some sort of bonus. That bonus is, the ability to get more shots, so you get more opportunities to shoot. It can also put marbles on the field. And another one that's a key thing here is that there's also something called a card drop. And a card drop basically takes a playing card, or essentially not really a playing card, but a themed card. In the case of what's on screen here, there's Maria. What's her name? Maria something. I'm not up on my Castlevania lore anymore. Sorry. My brain's saying Fernandez, but it's Carrie Fernandez. Maria Belnades? I don't remember. Anyways, Maria and Alucard. You guys don't care. And these cards will fall onto the field and they land on top of the marble. And so part of the goal as well is to push these cards off. For me, I just wanted the card just to be like, here's my little souvenir. But you can use the cards to basically get tickets. There's numbers on them. I don't know if the numbers play any role. But I got Alucard when I finally got my card. So essentially you just kind of sit there. You can like adjust the angle at which these marbles shoot onto the field, and then obviously there's the timing aspect too. Timing it with how the pusher pushes it back in and out and stuff like that. I don't want to say it's not a video game, right? We are not looking at a video game here, or maybe I should say, it's not a traditional video game, because ultimately you could make this into a video game, right? There's pachinko games all around, but this really feels like gambling, but instead of getting money, you're getting tickets, right? And, I think most of the thrill comes from, basically getting some sort of payout, when you get it in the spinner thing, and the slot machine goes, and all those kind of dopamine hits you get from there. And one thing that I thought was kind of interesting is almost like a physical aspect as well, because these cards that sit on top of the marbles, they slowly get pushed out. And so as you get further and further to that card getting pushed towards you, there's definitely more and more incentive to just keep playing. And one thing that happened when I was playing this time was the Alucard card got on the very edge of the push out, and I ran out of marbles basically. And so I had to sit there and ask myself, do I want to go load up my Dave or whatever it is, round one card? I said Dave and Buster's earlier, I think, with more money to get this card, because otherwise I'm leaving empty-handed. Even though I'm not really leaving empty-handed, obviously I had the experience of playing this game, right? And all these thoughts and feelings I had about it. But I think what was interesting about that was even though sometimes I think about games that pressure you to spend money digitally, and when you can't see how something is working and how something's placed, sometimes it can feel like you're being more directly manipulated, where it's I'm playing a digital slot machine, essentially a digital gotcha machine, right? And the odds for things can feel unfair, right? And there's those manipulations, pity pulls and things like that, where it's after a certain number of fails, they're gonna give you a win because we got to keep you on, right? And so it feels like in a digital space, it's a lot more easier to feel like you're being manipulated. And in some ways, I would say these cards getting pushed out and slowly moving towards you feels like a similar manipulation, but it's entirely physical, where it's just the closer and closer it gets, the more willing you are to spend money on this thing. Or at least that's how I felt. And I thought it was an interesting thing, because technically it's not really being controlled by the machine, but obviously it's very much a part of the design of the game kind of thing. So There's really not much more to say about it. I think, compared to coin games, I think a lot of the challenges with um, a game like Castlevania Marble Souls is that the marbles are a lot less predictable in some ways, I feel like, or at least they're maybe a little bit more chaotic, because unlike coin games where things can, like, a coin will move and, like, when it hits a wall, it's probably going to fall over or bounce off in certain ways. Marbles feel like, obviously there's physics coming to play, but they're a lot harder to understand and predict exactly where they're going to go and why and how they're going to respond to the machine. And coins kind of, I think, have a shorter tail on how, um, uh, weird there. Oh, hey, look, there's my jeans. I did go ahead and try another game that Konami had put out as well. It's this game called Gold Railroad. It's also a pusher, and it's a coin pusher. And I think I actually really like the aesthetic of this game. It's got these little, like, cute bunny characters and stuff, and there's this golden train that you're on. And it's got, like, this Mario Party board. It goes around the Mario Party board. I think there's, like, different bonuses and stuff like that depending on where it goes. And I think every time there's, like, these little orange balls, and I think the little orange balls, like, kind of push you around the stage. And then when those balls come in, you also get another slot machine there. Again, more or less gambling. And it drops this other, like, orange ball. It's like, this machine has a lot more, like, weird visual gimmicks going on that don't really matter. To be clear, these don't really matter, right? It's like when you push the button to stop the slot machine, what it does is it releases a ball that also moves around. You have no control over the positioning of the ball, no control over anything. It is all just, like, something that you can't do anything about. So it's like, how much does it really matter when you press the button, I think, is kind of up in the air. But it's a game that just, like, has a lot more visual flair and things like that. So I think it comes off as a lot more appealing. In a similar way, this game also has cards. It seems like some of these games, I don't know if this is true for the Castlevania one, but there's, like, a complete set of cards you can get. So on the back of some of these cards for this Gold Railroad game, there's, like, large form portrait art. So like I said earlier, you are kind of intended to put these cards in the machine and get it turned into tickets and things like that. I just kept the cards, whether I should or not. I don't know. I don't know if this is committing a crime, but it's kind of blown out on screen. Got an a la carte card. So I ended up just keeping the cards as, like, a what's it called? But I like this game a little bit more, mostly because I think there's a lot more visual flair to it. It feels like there's just a lot more going on. And also, like I mentioned earlier, the coins feel a little bit more predictable, or at least the chaotic nature of them ends a lot sooner. So it feels like I can more easily, like, figure out where I should be putting things and things like that. But ultimately, with these games, I will say they do just kind of feel like gambling. And, I'm not saying gambling is all bad, but I think anytime you're doing gambling, there's, like, some level of feeling like, oh, am I really getting my value out of this? And I'd say for the most part, I would say these games are not really worth it. I think I spent, like, $35 to $40 for maybe, like, 35 to 40 minutes of play. So, like, let's say, like, $1 per minute of play. And I'll be honest with you, I don't spend a lot of time at American arcades. I mostly spend my time at Japanese arcades when I'm in Japan. And Japanese arcades just seem a lot more affordable, not only because of the yen difference, but also I think that Japanese games are more willing to give you more time. And I think part of that might be because, the way you interact with arcade games in Japan feels a lot more potentially to happen on a day-to-day basis, as you can all walk around. You have more, like, walkable cities that you can go and get to an arcade on the way home, right? Versus, when everything's so spread out in America, these kind of trips down to the arcade, I think, often can feel like events where you go once, and so they kind of need, I think, maximize the money they get out of you all at once, rather than, bleed you over time. In Japan, I think live service games is the thing I compare arcade games to the most. But yeah, I would not really recommend these games, but I thought they were interesting. I think, sometimes I think about, like, I would like to better understand how gambling works and, like, kind of the incentives that come through gambling. But a metal machine, I think, I could be wrong, but I feel like a metal machine feels close enough to gambling that you'll get a lot of similar feelings from it. With hopefully less financial burden. I don't know. I think it'd be I think part of the thing about, like, wanting to understand gambling more and, like, going and actually gambling is, like, do you actually end up unintentionally building a gambling habit because you're trying to understand how gambling habits are built? Like, something that happens with, like, Final Fantasy 11 sometimes is, like, I will let myself be addicted to it because I want to understand how that addiction works and why it works. And like, if I feel like I'm not actually having fun playing Final Fantasy 11, what is driving me to keep playing Final Fantasy 11? Because I kind of want to know the answer to that. And you know, I feel like at times it can be a very dangerous thing in terms of how I learn about games. But you know, I don't feel a desire to go back and play these games again, really. So I think I got what I needed. $40 well spent for the knowledge, $40 not well spent for the gameplay experience. Huh. Intermission. We're here. Oh, welcome. This is talking about earlier where like I have a lot of show left here, but also I think we're like an hour in, it feels like. So let's go to the Ko-fi corner. What's going on Ko-fi? I'm not signed into Ko-fi, so I'm going to have to go do that real quick. Let me do that. We're back. Demo Dory, thank you again for donating in the month of March, for supporting me. We are actually, I'm kind of curious, where are we at on the Ben takes time out of his technically work day to make more videos. Because right now I'm just kind of going at my own pace. We're about halfway through. Okay. So we're on our way there. Hopefully by the time we are at the point in time where we are doing that, we'll be able to I'll have something that I'm like more actively pushing on towards the end. But thank you again, Demadori, for supporting us. For supporting me and donating through the Ko-fi. We did have a new PCFX episode come out. We did a conversation about Team Innocent with the fan translation scenes. If you want to go check that out, go check that out. Otherwise, I've just been working on the Final Fantasy 11 video a little bit. I might start another video to go alongside it that would not release at the same time. The Final Fantasy 11 video is just going to be a very challenging video. And so I'm trying to just like put a little bit of time into it at a time and just kind of keep it moving because it's going to be a long path from here to there. So I'm trying to think if I can also do a smaller video that kind of I can do on the side that works alongside the Final Fantasy 11 video. I think that video would probably be kind of about, I think it would be about games like nobody really cares about, I think is kind of the way I'd position it. I'm not quite sure yet how I'll do it, but I think the point I'm trying to make in that video is going to be about, you know, connecting and getting like really interested in games that end up kind of pushed aside in gaming history and like why it matters. I think part of this comes out of the there's a video that somebody shared in our my Discord. I think maybe Alex shared it, where he linked a video about people who like bad games. And for one, I want to say I appreciate that they are willing to kind of accept that term and try to make it into a positive. I think I've said before, I don't like the term bad games because it creates a very a weird dismissive nature, I think, or at least the way I observed it is like when I talk to the people, it creates a dismissive nature about like what you like in games because it's just about, oh, you like bad games, right? But you know, Area and I forget this other person, this other video that it was, they kind of both embraced the term bad game. And, you know, I think if you can make the term bad game not necessarily be a negative thing, you might be able to also approach it that way. And then you also might be able to hold on to that term as well, where I feel like I'm trying to sell to you what I think is valuable about those kind of games, but trying to keep it disconnected from the way people identify those games, which I think has its own problems in trying to get people to listen to what you're saying about it. So I don't think I'll present it in a bad game kind of way, because I think the thing I'm thinking about is beyond bad games. I don't think the thing I'm feeling is specifically about bad games. I think it's just about games that people don't really give the time of day generally. So we'll see if that happens. This is the 1 year anniversary of the Hot Pot Gaming thing. So the next episode coming out, I think, is technically like 11 months, but it will be the 12th episode that comes out. So I feel like I'm still trying to figure out what works best for that show. I personally, and maybe this is where like I would be interested in what you guys think about it. I think what I get most out of that show is the very end, where I'm like basically like, okay, here I've listened to the show. separately from when I recorded it, right? I watched myself and how I behaved on this show. And I watched the other person, how they behaved and how they responded. And I can sit there and kind of like analyze what happened on that show. And I think it's a very helpful process for me to sit down and be like, what happened here? Why do I think that happened? And what can I learn from it? Right. I don't know if that's like something that other people find interesting. So if you do listen to Hot Pot Gaming, and I think a valid answer is that I don't really care. It just sounds like you're wrapping up the show. I'd be curious to know how you feel about the end sections of Hot Pot Gaming, because I think that's where I invest a lot of my personal value in it. I think the part of the problem with that, though, is that I'm very much I'm burying the lead in terms of like what exactly is being said on the show, because it's basically like, you've listened to the whole thing. Let me tell you why I think this episode was worthwhile, and I'm telling you that like as you're ending the episode. So I don't know if that's like something that should be brought up forward, right? Like sometimes I think about like, how do I present Hot Pot Gaming to people? And one of the things that I think comes up, I think the way a lot of podcasts get advertised these days is through clips, right? And I've had some success with this on OCP Plus for it comes to this podcast specific. When I break out topics, a few of them will often reach way more than the podcast would ever reach on its own. But I do feel like with Hot Pot Gaming, there's not really ever these peak points in those episodes where it's like, here's one thing to highlight in an episode. And so it's like hard to clip that stuff out. It's kind of like, this is all kind of part of one big message. And so because I look at it in that way, I think I have a lot harder time finding like, how do I present the show to people? What is the important part of the show? And then how do you expand that out to a larger audience than just who's like coming in and listening from their audience? And then obviously, my core audience here as well. Not that I necessarily need to do it, but it's just something I've thought about, kind of thing, right? And generally, I think the show has been consistent in the type of people we're talking to, the topics we're going over, in terms of making sure we're trying to find some sort of point that I'm like trying to expand on that's beyond just like, my perspective on it, right? I think that part of the show has been consistent and good, and I think that's probably not a bad thing to be consistent about. I think the one thing that I'm still thinking about with Hot Pot Gaming is like, do I want to have harder conversations on the show, right? So one thing that came up when I was talking to Luis Aguas Vivas was I forget why it came up, but we were talking about like Gamergate and then also DEI list stuff. And I think I was very much just like, I had very negative feelings about that at the time, the Gamergate stuff, because I felt like there's a lot of reasons why. But when I look at the DEI and gaming stuff, I get very similar vibes from that. And I don't necessarily know if that's a justified stance on that. It's more of, I looked at it and I was like, this looks like a space that I don't think is super valuable to be talking about, right? But it is something that I think is there's probably some value in looking at it to some extent, right? Because it is something that is a part of the game industry and a part of gaming conversations. But I think the problem is with something like, I look at the website DEI Detected or something like that, and a handful of other creators who are talking about this stuff, is that what I see in those conversations is there are conversations that seem more willing to say, these people are wrong and they're fundamentally wrong, and I'm not going to understand what they believe, right? That's what when I'm looking at these things, like there's a lot of refusal to concede on anything because I've created this worldview of these people are out to get me, right? When I look into that stuff, and nobody like that's the thing. Like it's not hard for me to figure out why people feel the way, or at least I would say to me it seems pretty obvious why people feel the way they feel about the DEI stuff, right? Nobody likes nobody likes feeling like they're being manipulated. Easy enough. Easy thing. Nobody likes that, right? Whether it's a corporation, whether it's through religion, whether it's through culture, whether it's through all these things, nobody wants to feel like they're being manipulated. And, especially when you have somebody really bought into this idea, they've built a narrative about how they're being manipulated. And as you start gathering people that feel that way or have bought into that narrative because they feel like, oh, games aren't as good as they used to be before, why not DEI or something like that, right? Like it's like once people start buying into that and in crowds, it's like a narrative that in some ways is like a self-fulfilling narrative. I feel like where it's like, oh, I'm looking for these things in the industry and I'm going to blame what I don't like about the industry on these things now, right? And I think there's just a lot of harm that can come through that. I think people end up getting targeted through that because people start making narratives that you are there trying to control me. And then so they feel justified in trying to control you, right? That's really what a lot of it is, it feels like. And this is like a greater, like this is not specific to this thing. But I'm just saying that this is the vibe I'm getting from this space. So like part of me feels like there's probably some valuable conversation there to be like, what exactly are you feeling and why are you feeling that? And what is the solution to this that isn't go and harass people, go and boycott people who are likely just people trying to make video games, right? Like we all create these narratives about like who's out to get us and stuff. And that's like one of the easiest ways for us to look at the world, right? Is who is out to get us and how do I fight back about that, right? And everyone falls into these traps. I fall into these traps. It's just how it is. But like that in particular, that topic, like to me, it feels like if I were to do that, something like that publicly on a podcast like Hot Pie Gaming, it has a lot more potential to do harm, especially if I don't have the ability to navigate that conversation in a productive way, right? And make sure that it's not just something where somebody's like trying to start pushing that like these people need to be punished, right? Because it's a very emotional thing they're going through, right? So I think that's like my concern in terms of having what I might define as harder conversations, right? Whether that's actually harder or not, I don't know. But I think part of me also feels like, what is the point of Hot Pot Gaming? And I think a lot of ways it is to elevate people who I think are doing positive games in the space or maybe have like positive values and can add to the world of stuff. I don't think that's 100% needs to be like one thing that came up was like, maybe I shouldn't say there have been some complaints in the past about certain episodes being too negative. And I don't necessarily have a problem with an episode being negative, right? But I just don't want an episode to be like harmful, right? I think that's my big thing. I think it's how I feel about that. So who knows? I think also the thing with like the DEI stuff in particular is like that doesn't necessarily need to be a public conversation. That's something I can figure out in a private conversation if I want to reach out to one of these people and just like get an understanding. I did something that recently. Again, I won't say who, but I had a situation where there's somebody that I felt like was doing something very negative, and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And like I talked to them about it, and I much better understand why they made what they did. Do I think they made the right thing? No. But, I was able to listen to them. I understand what they're feeling. And I feel like generally, when I talked to them, they had a different view on the topic they wrote about. And it felt like that was something that I could see reflected in their follow-up work, right? And like that's, I think, a valuable thing to happen still. And that's like part of the value of having those conversations with those people. But I think it is a lot more challenging when you start raising those things up in a public platform. And like, I think in some ways, like it's not like not everything needs to be on a podcast. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Some of these conversations can be private and they can have value being private, right? That's not everything needs to be for show, right? I think that's kind of the thing. But anyways, that's just like some of the thoughts I had. I think I would be very surprised if I went down that route of talking about topics like that. But it is something that I continue to try to evaluate and try to figure out like what would be the best way to do this if we did this, if I did this. But I feel like I have a lot of other things I could talk about that would just be a lot more productive, I think, more than anything. And I think would be a lot more valuable to people overall. So yeah. Anyways, Hot Pie Gaming. Thanks to everybody who's come onto the show. Thanks to everybody who's listening. Thanks to Joseph for responding to every episode with comments. I super appreciate that. It's like it is nice to see someone say this is like something I thought about this and give like a detailed explanation how they feel and ask their own questions. I think that's good. But again, like I said earlier, in a lot of ways with Hot Pot Gaming, I want you to go talk to somebody that you are curious about like what's going on in their space and learn something, right? Like I have this idea of what this thing is, and then you can introduce somebody else's perspective on it rather than just kind of assuming what their perspective is or just consuming, the content they put out. I think that's part of it as well. It's just like having a conversation with somebody rather than just watching their video and then, never talking to somebody directly about something, right? That's something I don't really like about videos is this kind of one-way nature of them where it feels like I feel like I don't really know how to get feedback from you guys. And I think part of the thing I've been trying to do or was trying to do with community reviews is try to implement more of this loop of like, hey, what can you guys say? How can you get involved? And how can we encourage good conversations about games through people in our community and stuff like that? Which, I think it had some success and some failures to some extent, but part of that just died because the stream died and I stopped doing streaming. So yeah. Anyways, you guys hear about Nintendo? Nintendo.com. Donkey Kong, put .com at the end of anything and it's funny, Ben. Yeah, Switch 2 happened. Again, I'm not going to go over a ton of this because I just think you've had your ears bled into by the Switch. I think the big things I kind of took away from the Switch is, Donkey Kong. I forget the full name of the game, but it looks really cool. I think the thing that I like most about Donkey Kong is that it's leaning into Donkey Kong's power in a way that, like, I don't feel like other Donkey Kong games have. Like, the trailer especially, just, like, every moment, it's like, bam, 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 bam. Donkey Kong's doing something that's, like, hard smash kind of thing. It reminds me of how people felt about that one game. Was it Hulk Total Destruction or something like that? There's, like, a PS2 Hulk game that people really liked, and just like part of it was just like being able to like go and bash a bunch of stuff and things like that. I'm sure the game probably didn't do like in hindsight it probably didn't do a ton, but it like the way that game Donkey Kong looks reminds me of how people used to talk about that Incredible Hulk game. So I think it looks really cool. I think if I get a Switch, I will probably build the Switch 2. I think I'll be playing Donkey Kong Donkey Kong Powerful Punch. I don't know the full name. Donkey Kong. There's that Dragix Drive game. This is normally something I would be into. It's the one where you have to use the Switch 2 controllers where you like can swipe them and you're like in a wheelchair basically, and you're playing wheelchair basketball, which I think is a real sport that like is at a, like has the Olympics and things like that as well. But it looks very much like an old NST game to me, like Nintendo Software Technology, like their American branch. I'd be curious if NST is working on it, because I don't think NST has made a video game in a very long time. I think they, after Project Hammer, some stuff happened. That actually, maybe that's a lie, because I think they made Donkey Kong March of the Minis or something like that whole franchise. But yeah, I think they kind of ended up in this weird space in between. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they've made some stuff and I'm just not as tuned into Nintendo anymore. That being said, that game sure doesn't look like much of anything. Like, I think the concept's cool. It does feel like they couldn't really figure out what to do with how that game's going to look. It very much looks like a prototype in a lot of ways. And I think the big thing as well is just like nothing feels like it has weight to it from what, like watching the trailer. Maybe it'll feel different when you're like, doing the arm movements and things like that, as well as I guess I could bring it up on screen here actually, doing the arm movements and things like that. I think it just is a game that doesn't look super appealing. I do think there are some cool ideas here though, and I think if the HD Rumble like helps with like the grip feeling, I would love like if the HD Rumble rumbles differently depending like the type of terrain you're on or something. I think that'd be cool. I think this game has a lot of potential, but I think it just does not present very well, unfortunately. And it also feels like something that would be played on like the first like 2 weeks of the Switch 2, and then probably will just kind of fade into obscurity. But who knows? Who can say? I just don't know of anything that like looks like this that Nintendo has put out that has ever really caught on. There's a Switch 1 game called like Flip Chance or something like that. I don't remember exactly. It had a similar look to this, just like visually. I'm not sure who made that, but either way, I appreciate that they did try to do something interesting here. I never would have thought that like using a wheelchair would come into like how the mouse movement works on the Switch too, but I think it's like a cool idea at the very least. I think Mario Kart looks all right. I don't want to say too much about it because I didn't watch any of the additional content. I think everyone's been calling like Mario Kart Forza Horizon, which I've never played Forza Horizon, but big open world Mario Kart game, right? And I haven't really seen what the execution of this looks like and if it'd be fun, but I'm glad they're trying something different, whether it works out or not. And honestly, with Nintendo, most of the time, if they're going to take a franchise like Mario Kart and like revamp it, they're probably going to make sure it works before they just, drop something out. But you never know. Launch windows are always weird. Sometimes stuff has to get done just to make a launch, have a video game that's successful. I do like that they brought the outfits in though. I think that's very cute. And then also Konami has, I think it's called, Shinepost Be Your Idol. Konami announced this game for the Switch 2 in Japan specifically. This is a part of like a larger multimedia thing, I believe. I went and read some articles about this, and it seems like what this is, because this is like basically an idol raising sim, right? Where you're raising your different idols. It sounds like they are using some form of like AI stuff for the voice acting specifically. So I don't think it's like a fully AI voice acted game. But what they're doing, I believe, is they're taking like all the different singers, and I think depending on like their stats and their ability to perform, they are adjusting basically how a character sounds when they're singing. So, if a character is failing at singing, then I think it will basically impact how they actually sing. I don't remember if this game has actual rhythm elements or if it's purely a raising game, because if you don't know, some of these games are more or less just like you raise the character and then that just determines how they perform, and then other games have actual like direct inputs you do during the songs. But I feel like that is usually very de-emphasized in these games, and the more interesting or the bigger part of it is, managing this team of idols, right? If you're looking at the video version just on screen, there was like, how much did it cost to set up a concert? And like, what was the profits of the concert and stuff like that, right? That is the kind of thing you're doing. You're running your idol business. And then along with that, you get your like different characters and stuff, right? There is a game on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, although I think it was originally 360 mostly, called Dream Sea Club. And other idle games may have had this as well, where like the voice changes throughout the game. In the case of Dream Sea Club, it was a hostess club game, and so basically how a character sang depended on how drunk they were. But I don't believe it like changed actively during the song. So I'd be curious in this case if the goal is to like make active changes in the song depending on how it performs. But if it is a raiser, they'll probably already know ahead of time. But that does cut down on probably the needed time to record a bunch of versions, and also it might make it so you can do more diversity, right? Like I think Dream Sea Club has like 3 versions, one which is when the character's not drunk, one where the character is slightly drunk, and then one where the character is horrendously drunk. And so the way they sing is a bit different. So anyways, but yeah, I'd be curious to see if they localize this. I don't think there's been any sign of that yet. I know Idolmaster, I don't believe, has had any real... Well, the mobile game for Idolmaster, I think, has been localized. I don't think any of the other games have. And I think this is a actual packaged product that you're buying, yeah. So I'm not sure how many of these like packaged product idle games have really come out in the US, and if they are have been successful enough for a company to try. If there's any company that's willing to put a game out in Japan and then not worry about what Americans get or any other country, it's probably Konami. They do a ton of game stuff in Japan and seem to be perfectly fine with only Japan getting it, which is kind of what I like about Konami, and also very frustrating about Konami, because it's like people are like, Konami doesn't do anything. Like, they do stuff. They just only release it in Japan most of the time. So yeah, but it looks interesting. If this comes out in the West, it'd be one of those games that if I was getting a Switch 2 at launch, I would definitely pick this up. But because I'm probably not getting a Switch 2 at launch, this is a game that will probably disappear into the ether, and I will probably never end up playing it. So Personally, I'm happy to just wait for whatever, whenever it makes sense. I think we've talked about before. I have like a PlayStation 5 that has one video game in my collection right now. And so the idea of needing a Switch 2 is just not very high on my list. Obviously, if you are very tuned into the modern industry and you want to be like directly engaged with it, that's obviously a very different predicament than what I'm in. I am somebody who am very happy to play games of all eras and then get to modern games when it makes sense for me, kind of thing. But I think this and Donkey Kong would be the two games that I'd be most interested in checking out of that initial launch lineup. So Mario Kart, I probably should check out, but I have a rough history with Mario Kart. I'm sure if I played it, the big thing is I just want to make sure I appreciate it for what it is. Because Mario Kart is this franchise that I think I have generally been poo-poo on since the Wii. And, as my more recent Nintendo video has maybe told you, maybe some of those beliefs I have about Mario Kart may or may not be true. And it might be just how I felt about Mario Kart regarding, the whole position it was in the Wii era versus something like an Excite Truck, right? One thing that did come up, mostly, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I had a really hard read on how much people actually cared about the Switch 2 because so much of the discussion was around pricing and tariffs. Obviously the tariff conversation has been all over the place, and I don't really like everyone's going to sit there and tell you what they think about tariffs. I just don't really know what to say about it. I think what I really saw from a lot of the discussions around pricing stuff is, it's a high price system, but at the same time, we're looking at a time when video games don't really drop in price, right? For whatever reason, whether it be due to inflation and things like that, right? That, there's just a lot less wiggle room on dropping price to drive revenue, it seems like, unless you're on PC doing digital only, right? That kind of thing. So that being said, in saying that, there are plenty of ways to play video games on an affordable level or on devices you already have. So I'm not saying that video games are too expensive, but the Switch 2 is obviously, within a space, especially in the launch year, where you're the people who really care are the one who are going to be buying this thing, and probably at pretty much any price you're going to do. I maybe have said that same thing about the 3DS though, and clearly there's a problem there with 3DS, right? So I don't want to sit there and be definitive on that. When it comes to tariffs, everyone's gonna have their own explanation of how tariffs work. I feel like with tariffs, it's basically just a tariff good or tariff bad logic battle that happens. And then so what happens is basically whatever best aligns with my reality is what happens with tariffs. I thought this was a really good article from GameSpot. It's not really relevant anymore. But, when people were asking, how are tariffs going to affect the Switch, I thought this was a really good collection of people. These are the right people to ask about this. Daniel Ahmad, Matt Piscatella, people at these industry analysts, been in the industry for decades. But even in this article, they're just we don't know what's going to happen. Here's my idea. All anyone at this point can do is speculate, says Matt. So and that's really what happened. And I think even Daniel, after this article was up for a day or two, he's like, "Man, that article aged very poorly," because people can only guess, right? And I think it's just what you're getting here. I think is just here are the best people to try to make predictions, right? And at the end of the day, no one's a fortune teller, right? And I think a lot of times, I think what happens with people in these roles and people who want to undermine people in these roles is it's people view these as people that are people view them as people who are saying facts, when I think the way they should be viewed is here are the people who best understand this segment of the market. That doesn't mean they know everything. It just means that they best understand this space. And I can't predict everything at the same time, right? And that's, I think, part of it. How do we best understand the world, basically? So, but I think the problem with the tariff discussion is that it goes well beyond anything to do with Nintendo or the pricing or whether tariff good or bad. It is where are you emotionally, in terms of where there are much deeper wounds, I guess, that go beyond all this stuff. And so where you're feeling emotionally about the world and the state of the world is going to change how you feel about what this is. I had a really hard conversation with one guy that was just he was calling Nintendo stupid because he was how could they not have predicted the tariffs? And it's just like, I'm trying to tell him just like, well, put tariffs good or bad aside. Here's what was generally expected by the market, and here's what actually happened. And like, he just could not fathom this gap. And I think it's just, when it comes down to it, it's like, if you think the tariffs are good for a legitimate reason, then you are going to have this belief that it is the reasonable thing to do this, right? Where if you're on the other side of it, it's not going to be reasonable looking, right? And I think the thing that I kind of run into is like, if you ever like if you have somebody who's like very emotional about something, and you're in a situation that's like an emotionally thing, and that's not saying emotional in the sense that like, oh, I'm the one being above this here because I'm not emotional, right? We're all emotionally connected to these things in different ways, right? Everyone has these emotional connections, and I think a lot of times what you need to do first before you have any discussion of logic or statistics or anything like that is, where is this person emotionally at right now, right? And I think once you can do that, you can start having a discussion about like what these individual things mean. But if somebody's in a mindset where just like they are in this particular mindset about how these things work, tariff good or tariff bad, there's no way you can logic them out of that hole, right? And then so things that are just like raw facts start meaning different things to them, right? And then they just don't understand how other people see it other ways. I think that is like a lot of it. So I think I said it already, but like these are cuts that go deeper than tariffs. Tariffs are just the surface level of what's happening with that. Obviously, that's not saying that this doesn't have an impact. I would get into it. You already know. You fucking know if you're looking into this stuff. Like it's not I'm not here to tell you anything about all that stuff, how to feel about it, good or bad. That's just not what I'm trying to do. I know if you know me personally, you know how I feel about it, so I'm not, but I think what I'm just trying to say is very neutrally in this situation. I'm not trying to very specifically point to any specific thing right now. But I do have my own feelings on it, but I just don't think that's very valuable to talk about here. Because again, everybody wants to tell you how they think it works, and we're already like the conversation moves so fast as well. We're so far beyond it. I thought about maybe I shouldn't talk about this, but I think what I was looking at more than anything was just like, how are people interacting with each other about this topic, not about the topic itself, because I feel like the topic itself was just, there's just so much information being thrown around and everybody wanted to prove a point, right? So anyways, you guys want to talk about a video game though? Switch for $450. whatever you believe. Switch $450 right now, it sounds like. So that is what you get. Speaking of video games, Switch video games. Don't look at that. What does that say? Don't look at that. Don't look at my crypto game research. My notepad crypto game research. I think that's what you saw on screen. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you saw my crypto game research stuff. Don't worry about it. That is me doing my thing in the background. Don't worry about it. Like okay, if you want to know anything, it's because I was curious like if the crypto market had grown at all or if it only shrunk. The short of it is that it is growing again. Just because I was trying to get a read on like what the industry is actually looking like and why people keep investing in this space, right? So anyways. Azure Striker Gunvolt 3. I played this game. If you know, I've been talking about playing this game for like, I don't know, basically before its release, I was like, I need to get around to that. And then I never actually got around to it until now. And I found out apparently this game has a poor reputation for some reason. I'm not really sure why. That's not being dismissive. I just haven't looked into it. But yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with the Gunvolt series, it's a very like 2D action platformer kind of thing with a big focus on, I'd say, speed and comboing a lot of times too, where you're kind of like trying to chain attacks together and things like that. And Gunvolt 3, like kind of the previous games in the franchise that were sequels, they feature multiple characters. This game features a new character called Kieran, which is basically like a sword wielding, I don't know, I think she calls herself a battle priestess kind of thing, right? And you can also play as Gunvolt in this game, though, but he's more of like a super-powered character versus Gunvolt 2, where he's like a separate campaign. So I played through the entire game basically as Kieran, or whatever her name is. And she's an interesting character. I think the big thing with Gunvolt is like, how do each of these characters function? And or how do these characters function and how do they play differently? And I think at the end of the day, though, every character is really focused on moving fast overall. At least that's my personal understanding of how these games work. And so while Gunvolt and Copen before kind of focused on tagging an enemy and then kind of destroying them from afar, Kieran is about tagging an enemy and then getting up right on close to them and then killing them that way. And there's kind of a few different ways you can do that. There's like a melee combo that you have that you can throw it and then and slash into them, or you can also throw your talisman into them and then just like dash into and do damage. Most of the time, your talisman, one or two of your talisman will kill enemies. But the more you tag an enemy with your talisman, the more damage you'll do when you do that jump slice kind of thing. So I think this game requires a lot more precision than the past Gunvolt games because it is a lot more about basically staying in the air. Like basically Gunvolt games are all super easy video games. You can get through them no problem. But the challenge comes in is how you score. And a big part of this game scoring wise is staying in the air, making sure you're tagging stuff and keeping moving. And then as you go through, hitting something else so you get launched in the air again and you can tag another thing and go. It's way harder than you'd expect if you're a new player. So I think it is very much a practice makes perfect kind of thing in a way that past Gunvolt games I don't think has had nearly much as an emphasis on. But overall, it's still a very fast feeling game. You can dash through the levels. And again, since it's so easy, you can kind of make it as fast or slow that you want it to be. Just a matter of, are you going to get a good score or not is kind of up to how well you master the mechanics kind of thing. I think the mechanics of this game are really solid. It just doesn't necessarily add anything to the series. I think it is just like kind of a variation on what has already been done. And I think if you are a long-term Gunvolt player, you'll appreciate the kind of additional depth to how Kieran moves and how Kieran combos specifically and the challenge that comes with that personally. So it's got a variety of stage themes, but overall I think there are more visual differences. I think one problem that Gunvolt games have always had is like, how do we differentiate these stages, because so much of the game is focused on how a character moves. I don't think Gunvolt 3 really solved that problem. So I think what Gunvolt 3 to me does that stands out the most, besides just adding a new character, is how basically the story progresses a little bit. Well, maybe not how it progresses, but like your interactions with different characters in the story. So this game takes a very like Mighty Number 9 approach. What I mean by that is when you go and defeat at least the earliest bosses in the game, instead of them just dying and giving you like a new ability, in this game you do get new abilities as well, just not as like themed as like a Mega Man. You gain an allyship with the boss basically, and they come work for your company basically. It's kind of silly, but it is like a fun concept where like you beat up this boss and then he comes and he's like sitting next to you in the cubicle kind of thing. It's a cute idea. I think the whole thing with like how this game works from like the characters interacting is generally overall pretty cute. Gunvolt, for whatever reason, you know, I know why, but without getting into it, he's a dog in this game, so they play a lot around with like the idea that like Gunvolt can't do a lot of things he used to because he's a dog. So it's like, why don't we do a puzzle together? He's like, I don't know how to puzzle with dog paws kind of thing. So it's a lot of cute things like that, and all the characters I think are very much in the way that Gunvolt games are, like these very hyper like stereotypical version of the character. You get like this brawny meathead guy who lifts weights, and his whole thing is, you know, how can I work workouts into the office and stuff like that, right? Yeah, this little like, I don't know, nerdy kid who actually wants to be kind of manly and reliable. He probably wants to be more reliable, but I think, you know, the manliness stuff kind of comes out of that. And then you have like the goofy guy who talks in a bunch of slang, and like this is not like this stuff is Gunvolt has a lot of characters and a lot of characters like this, so you'll feel at home with this. But I think what this game does really well is it makes these characters feel a lot more engaged in the core narrative. And so, you know, these characters that you have recruited are helping you solve problems in terms of the narrative of the story, right? I do wish they had a little bit more of a presence on screen at times. So there's a few levels towards the back half where a lot of these characters will theoretically be on the same stage as you, and occasionally they'll kind of show up. But they're mostly kind of portrayed in dialogue. They're kind of telling you what's happening to them rather than them showing to you what's happening. And this is kind of what Gunvolt likes to do, is that like when you're playing a game or when you're playing a stage, it likes to tell you a lot about the narrative, even though the game's not really paced for that, because a lot of the narrative gets cut off if you like play the game too fast. But But I think what the big thing is that, it does kind of interconnect these characters into the story in a way that, like, I think past companions in the Gunvolt series maybe don't directly relate to what's happening in the stage as much. So these characters do have a presence. They just are a little bit more, I think, not as directly on screen as I would like them to be. Sometimes they do show up occasionally. I'm not saying that they don't at all, but I just wish there's a little bit more there. The core narrative of the game, I think generally, and I think this might be where a lot of Gunvolt fans might have been upset about this game, if, like, again, not looking into it. And I think this is true of all Gunvolt games to some extent, with maybe the exception of some of the spin-offs. Narratively, it just doesn't really do much in terms of, like, where the story's going from the past. It's been a long time since I've played Gunvolt 2, right? I played Gunvolt 1 when it came out. I played Gunvolt 2 when that came out. And I think Gunvolt 2 came out in like 2016. So it's been almost 10 years since I've played Gunvolt 2. So, like, narratively, where Gunvolt's at in his journey, I don't really know. And I feel like the developers kind of try to account for that by just, like, they kind of give you a little lowdown on what Gunvolt is, but I think they also just kind of disconnect Gunvolt from whatever he was struggling with at that time. It doesn't mean it's not a part of the story, but it just isn't really the focus of the story, right? This other thing is happening now, and we're going to tell you about what happened to the Gunvolt in the past through this other thing, but we're not going to kind of directly address those things. And I think what ends up happening through that is a lot more gaps in the narrative because of that. I don't mind that so much because I'm very much more of a character-focused person, but even as somebody who doesn't care about that stuff as much, I think it was very apparent to me that this game seems like it just doesn't really engage all that much with what was happening in the past games at all. So story-wise, I just think it might be a little unfulfilling overall. But I think this is a good game overall, though. I think if somebody said this is like the worst Gunvolt game they've played, I would say, oh gosh, sure, maybe. But it is like very slightly, like, I think it really depends on what you want. Like, is this a game that's more challenging for me, a casual player who's not trying to get a high score? Sure. Like, it doesn't flow as well as the past games because the character design is, again, like I said, a lot more precise, I think, in terms of how you control them. But I think part of that comes with an understanding that the players playing this game have been invested for a while. And so, making a character that I think generally kind of fits in with somebody who has a understanding of how these game mechanics work over this period of time, I think makes a lot of sense. I do kind of feel like Gunvolt has more or less run its course. I mean, I could maybe have said that beforehand. I think there is a general sentiment that the Gunvolt series overextended itself because they only had 3 mainline games, but they also had 2 spin-offs, X and X2. And I really like X1, and I think X2 also has some really cool things about it. I think I did a review on it, but I don't remember what I said in it. Honestly, I do remember liking both games overall, but it does kind of feel like this game is just like another one of those. But, when you think about people who are fans of the Mega Man franchise, and this game has its roots in Mega Man, that might be just something that fan base expects. For me, somebody like me who wants something new, I think it's if they made another Gunvolt game after this, I'd have to really see some big change for me to ever get interested in again. But, I just think it's a really cool game overall, or maybe I should say it's a really solid game overall. I think it is just like, it has its purpose. I think the character itself plays well. It's just nothing particularly new for me personally. So anyways, that's it. Ooh, hour and 30 minutes, baby. So, yeah, that's me here for this month. Thanks for listening. I got a new podcast coming up here shortly for the Hot Pod Gaming. That is going to feature Amber of Automaton Media. A weird get, but the editor-chief of the Western branch of that. It is definitely the most like formal thing I've ever tried to get, right? Most of the time, I still have Gunvolt on the screen, so I'm just mesmerized by Gunvolt. Gunvolt is a cool looking game. I'll give it that. At the very least, I think it just looks nice. And it feels nice to play. Yeah, so I have that interview coming up, and that's going to be kind of about, running a Japanese language or Japanese news publication that's in English. Gaming news publication. So that's going to be coming up here. I am kind of doing some stuff on the PCFX fan club. I don't want to promise anything right now just because I haven't really gotten too much progress, but the Team Innocent episode is out, so go check that out if you haven't listened to that yet. And then hopefully we're going to be doing some more videos over there. And then when it comes to scripted videos, those are in the works, but still in the scripting phases. So don't expect anything super anytime soon for those. So anyways, thank you guys so much. Hope you guys have a great month, and I will see you in May. Bye bye.